Hi there, and welcome to Conservation Conversations, where we will be diving into the trials and triumphs of conservation in Africa. On this journey, we'll be working with experts, activists, and leaders as we uncover the innovative solutions and the inspiring stories shaping the future of environmental conservation in Africa. So, come with us and let's walk the talk. I'm your host, Elizabeth Kitari Mitaro. So today, I would like us to have a conversation around the elephant in the room, or that has been in the room for the last 1 month in conversations around conservation in the country, and specifically our beloved gem, Amboseli National Park. As we all know, the president later last year made a presidential declaration to transfer Amboseli National Park, or to think of a framework of transferring Amboseli National Park to the county government of Kajiado. Now, this particular decision has elicited quite a bit of, I want to use the word controversy, specifically because there are two functions, or factions as it were, of people within the conservation community, citizens of Kenya, communities in Amboseli and in Kajiado County, who have a differing opinion on how this particular directive would impact them personally and as a group as well. And so later on, or earlier on this year, once the advisory council was constituted to advise the president on what that should look like, the advert that got out was that the government is considering a transfer of functions from the national government to the county government of Kajiado in respect of Amboseli National Park and its management. And so it then became very clear that what the government wasn't considering was a change of status of Amboseli National Park into a national reserve. Now, there is a very well laid out process under the Wildlife Conservation and Management Act of 2013 that tells us how do we change the status of a national park into a national reserve, and what are the consequences of such an action. Obviously, such a decision has to go through Parliament, and there is a long and elaborate process on how we actually get into such a situation. There is a provision in the Wildlife Conservation and Management Act for the varying of a boundary of a national park, but the Act doesn't actually consider conversion of a national park into a national reserve. I don't like using the word degrading, or degrading a national park and bringing it a grade down to a national reserve, because I do think that irrespective of the fact that there are different levels of protection for those two protected areas, or those two different types of protected areas, the same would not equate to one being superior to another. And so it became very clear that the government is not considering changing Amboseli National Park into a national reserve. And what they actually want to do, or the proposal, is to transfer the function that accrues to national government in relation to Amboseli National Park to Kajiado County Government. And so the question becomes, is there a legal framework for this to actually happen? And the answer is yes, under Article 187 of the Constitution of Kenya. So Article 187 of the Constitution of Kenya makes it very clear what the actual transfer of functions would look like and what the legal framework is. And so it makes it clear that it is possible for a function or a power of government at one level to be transferred to a government at the other level by agreement between the governments. And then in comes the very important phrase, if, meaning that unless the conditions that I'm about to expound are met, then the agreement would not be legally binding, and it would be unconstitutional, right? So what are the conditions that have to be met for a function or a power to be transferred by one government to the other, by one level of government to the other? Condition number one: the function or the power that is being transferred would be more effectively performed or exercised by the receiving government. Okay? And number two, that the transfer of that function or power is not prohibited by any act of parliament in Kenya. So those two conditions jointly must be met before any transfer of function or power happens. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, number one, what is the function and the power that is being proposed to be transferred? Is it the management of wildlife in Amboseli National Park? Is it wildlife security issues in Amboseli National Park? What exactly are the functions and the powers that the national government wants to transfer? Now, the call for public participation was vague in the sense that it did not declare that the national government proposes or intends to transfer these specific powers and functions to Kajiado County government. It is left to our own interpretation. And immediately you introduce individual interpretation of legal documents, you have potentially 50 million possible interpretations of that particular provision. So it would have been really helpful for the advisory council to actually elaborate and tell us that these are the specific functions and the specific powers that we are proposing to transfer from the national government to the county government. All right? And number two, that there should not be any law that prohibits that particular transfer. For example, the power, the national government power or mandate to protect us through the military cannot be devolved to county governments or cannot be transferred to county governments because there is a law that actually prohibits that. So we then go to Article 187.2. Once those two conditions have been met, that Kajiado County Government is able to demonstrate that the functions that are being proposed to be transferred to them, they have the capability and the capacity to effectively perform them and exercise them. Okay? So it is not enough for Kajiado County Government to say, we are ready. The citizens of the Republic of Kenya must be satisfied that Kajiado County Government can actually perform those particular functions effectively. All right? Now, once those two issues have been dealt with, we then go to Article 187.2. If a function or power is transferred from one level of government to another, then that particular transfer must be backed by arrangements to ensure that all the resources that are necessary for the performance of that particular function or exercise of the power are transferred to that government. So if we are saying that the function that is being transferred is the management of wildlife in Amboseli National Park, then the national government has to transfer all the resources that are necessary to enable Kajiado County Government to effectively manage Amboseli National Park. It is not enough for the national government to say, you're on your own, Kajiado County Government, we've transferred the functions, do with it as you will. That's not enough. They have to transfer all resources. And resources here meaning, intellectual resources, human resources, financial resources, all resources that are required to enable Kajiado County Government to actually manage the park, if that is the function that is being proposed to be transferred. Condition number 2 after the transfer is that the constitutional responsibility of the performance of that particular function continues to lie with the government that originally had that particular function. So if we are transferring, in this particular example, Amboseli National Park's management of the wildlife resources in Amboseli National Park to Kajiado County government from the national government, the national government must first, like we said, transfer all resources. And then number two, the responsibility does not transfer. What transfers is the performance and the exercise, but not the responsibility. What does this actually mean in practical terms? If anything were to go wrong, the buck still stops with the national government. If someone was to sue for a wrongdoing within Amboseli National Park, they would not sue the performers of the function, who would be Kajiado County government. That would go to the national government that already currently holds that particular responsibility. If there is increased poaching, the responsibility still lies with the national government. It does not transfer to the county government. A good analogy here, for example, is school-going children. So as parents, we send our children to school. It is our responsibility to ensure that our children go to school. But the act of learning, the exercise of that schooling and the learning and the education is in the hands of our children. It is our responsibility to ensure that they go to school, but it is not our responsibility to ensure that they learn. It is not us who will sit in the exam room. It is our children. It is the same analogy. So that responsibility is still retained by the national government. And so this then brings us to the question that we asked at the beginning of this episode. What are the functions that are being transferred? Is there anyone who can tell us what the functions are that are being transferred to the Kajiado County government? We must also ask ourselves, why are we transferring the functions? What is it that we need or we are seeking to achieve with this particular process? And once those two questions are answered comprehensively, then we will be able to know and to create a framework within which Kajiado County is empowered enough, as per Article 187.1, to exercise effectively that particular function and power that has been transferred to them. We are all aware that communities and the benefits that accrue to communities, the participation of communities, has been the bane of the existence of wildlife conservation in Kenya. Starting all the way from colonial periods, when Africans were driven out of biodiversity-rich areas, where it was criminalized to kill for subsistence, but licensed to kill for pleasure, i.e. hunting. We all carry the remnants of that dark time with us today. We have read books, we have heard stories of the disenfranchisement of communities across the entire country when it comes to natural resource governance, when it comes to their participation in natural resource governance, when it comes to them gaining any benefits from the sustainable utilization of those natural resources. And the line that we have to balance is, from a constitutional perspective, it is clear that all natural resources in the Republic of Kenya are owned collectively by the citizens of the Republic of Kenya. The Maasai of the South and the communities in the South do not own Tsavo National Park more than the Turkana of the North does. The person who lives in Kilifi County has as much a stake in the conservation and protection of Lake Turkana as the fisherman who fishes in Lake Turkana. We all own all these resources jointly, collectively, as a people. Having said that, we cannot turn a blind eye to the place that neighbors of these natural resources play in their conservation and protection. It is quite clear that there is a higher responsibility upon the community member who lives, for example, in Mbirikani Ranch down in Amboseli for the protection of the elephants in Amboseli than, say, myself who lives in Nairobi, for example. I do not have to contend on a day-to-day basis with the question of whether or not there will be elephants that leave the park and come onto my land and destroy my crops. That particular challenge is faced by the community member who lives with these animals on their land or next to. And so it would be unjust for us to look at this from the lens of all natural resources are owned collectively by the people of Kenya and refuse to acknowledge the place and the contribution that these communities play in the conservation of those natural resources. So it is only natural for these communities to feel disenfranchised when they're aware that Amboseli National Park provides a revenue of sometimes over 1 billion Kenya shillings, of hundreds of millions of Kenya shillings, but they don't see it. It does not translate to an improved quality of life for them. It does not translate to an improved coexistence with the wildlife that is in Amboseli National Park and the dispersal areas that are their farms and their homes and their grazing lands. And so perhaps the question that we have to ask ourselves is, how best can we deal with this particular problem? It is very easy for us to be reactionary and say, well, the county has asked for the park, so let's give them the park, without actually empowering the county to dig deeper to the root cause of the feelings of disenfranchisement by community members when it comes to these natural resources that occur within their geographical locations. It would be incredibly unjust for us to say, go ahead, transfer. We have washed our hands in the famous style of Pontius Pilate without actually recognizing that we are setting up the community for a very difficult road ahead. So this transfer, we as citizens of Kenya must ask, what are the functions being transferred? Why are the functions being transferred? How is the actual community member going to benefit from that transfer? What is the express improvement in quality of life for the people of Kajiado County just because the county government is now exercising and implementing? And remember what we said at the start. What is being transferred is the implementation and the exercise, but not the responsibility. And so we have to ask ourselves whether that is the right route. And if it's the right route to take, we must ensure that communities are 100% protected. We must ensure that this does not turn into elite capture of Amboseli National Park. That transfer has to make sense, has to make absolute sense to the quality of life of the current generation living in Amboseli National Park dispersal areas and the next 1,000 generations. Over and above that, it must not disenfranchise the citizens of Kenya, because collectively, irrespective of on whose land the wildlife occurs, we all own it as citizens of the Republic of Kenya. And we must also, as we conclude, think about the specific and very real risk that immediately this transfer happens, what will dissuade Nyeri County government from claiming the Aberdares? What will dissuade Turkana County government from claiming the lake? What will dissuade Taita Taveta County Government from claiming Tsavo National Parks? What will dissuade Nairobi County Government from claiming Nairobi National Park? And what does that mean for us as citizens of the Republic of Kenya? What does it mean in terms of impacts of the economy at a national level, impacts at an individual level, impacts looking into the future? We have to be courageous enough to ask the difficult questions, even when asking those questions makes you sound like a traitor to the cause. We have to ask the questions, and we must put in the work to find the answers. It's incredibly important. So I encourage all of us to relook at this situation, to put our thoughts down on paper, and to send an email to the chairperson of the Advisory Council with our thoughts. We will put the email address in the description box at the end of this podcast. So we have all seen the disaster that has befallen Kijabe Forest over the past 2 weeks. We have lost lives. We have lost livelihoods. There are people still who haven't been found in the mudslide that happened at Kijabe Forest. We have seen the incredible work by various government agencies to rescue and to try and find solutions. We have seen the incredible work being done by Kijabe Forest Trust, and we have seen how all of our contributions to that effort has actually led to an increase in the probability of finding those whom we have lost, in giving comfort to the people who've been left without homes, only with the clothes on their back. And so we appeal to you on behalf of Kijabe Forest Trust that you may contribute to those particular efforts to support those families through the M-Pesa till number 945996. And going forward, there is a lot of work that's going to have to be done to restore the forest back to its original glory and even better. So anything that you can spare, please send it to that till number. Kijabe Forest Trust is a trusted organization that has worked within the Kijabe Forest ecosystem over the past decade. And we are working with lots of partners, with the Red Cross, with government agencies. The CS Environment has been incredibly helpful with offering all the support that government can and all the force that comes with government support to assist the families recover from this tragedy and to begin the restoration process of the forest. And so we now appeal to you, please send your contributions to M-Pesa till number 945996. We will also put a link to the PayPal contribution link in our description box as well at the end of this podcast. And that's all the time we have for you today, ladies and gents, on Conservation Conversations. Thank you for tuning in. We do hope that you have learned something new and that you feel empowered to take action towards a more sustainable future. Remember, even small changes can make a big difference. Do connect with us on our social media channels at greenbrief_KE, at Liz Gitari, and all the links are in the description box. Until next time, goodbye.